Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we are talking a little bit about us and why we started this podcast. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. We are excited to have you join us to talk about the bar exam, everyone's favorite topic. The goal of this episode is to give you guys an idea of who we are, what the Bar Exam Toolbox is, and why we think it is important to talk about the bar exam as much as we do. I don't know, Alison, I think I talk a lot more about the bar exam than I ever thought I would when I was studying for the bar exam.
I'm pretty sure once I studied for the bar exam, I thought I would never have to think about it again, and here we are.
I know, exactly, right? All right, so Alison, do you want to share with our listeners a little bit about who we are?
Sure. I'll start with me.
Well, yeah, that makes the most sense.
Yeah, so I graduated from law school at Columbia and couldn't decide where to take the bar exam because I was torn between going back to California, where I had been before, and staying in New York, where I went to law school. So I just solved that problem. Since those are two of the hardest bar exams in the country, I decided to make the unorthodox choice and take the Massachusetts bar exam, where I was clerking. Mainly because the judge told me I had to take the bar exam somewhere. And when I said, well, I'm not sure I want to stay in Massachusetts, he said, yeah, but there's a 90% pass rate. At which point, pretty much the decision was made. So I did that right out of law school. And then I later took the California bar while I was working in San Francisco, having, of course, decided to get back to California and then having to take the California bar, which is really not fun.
No, and you had to do it quickly. You didn't get to the benefit of the attorney's exam because you hadn't been licensed long enough.
Right. So I had to take what was then the 3-day full exam while I was working at a large law firm. And they were going to give me, I think, 3 weeks off. And I spent the first week sick in bed. So I basically had 2 weeks to study.
And you have a crazy story about, didn't the neighbor's house catch on fire or something like that?
Oh, yeah. In the middle of my week in bed, I was woken up in the middle of the afternoon, literally by firemen banging on my door saying, get out of the house right now. There's no time to waste. I looked out of my back bedroom window on our patio, and there was black smoke pouring out of the house next to us. So I actually had that moment of, what do you take with you if you're studying for the bar exam and your house is about to burn down? So I think I grabbed one of the outlines and my computer and sat at a coffee shop across the street to see if my house was going to burn down, which thankfully it did not, but suffice it to say, it was a little bit stressful.
Yeah.
And even when I was in Massachusetts, I actually pre-clerked at a firm there and didn't really start studying until I think the 4th of July. So I definitely have a non-orthodox bar exam background, I think it's fair to say.
Yes. Where my background with the bar exam is a bit more traditional, I guess, until I started teaching the bar exam, then maybe it shifted. But I had a big firm job when I graduated from the University of San Francisco, and they basically paid for all of the bar prep that basically everybody does. So I took Barbary, I did PMBR, and I studied for 2 months. But I do think that during my bar experience, I recognized at a certain point that just doing what other people were kind of telling me to do was not going to get me where I needed to be. And I needed to study like I had studied in law school and knew how to study. And so there was a very distinct shift for me around the 4th of July where I realized that just doing a lot of this quote unquote busy work that the bar companies were asking me to do was not preparing me for the test. And once I started studying for the test like I knew how to study for tests, all of a sudden I was feeling like I was going to be much more successful. So after that, I went to work because I passed and they didn't fire me. and then I didn't really like litigating at a big firm. And so I left to do some teaching, and I just had the idea of starting to do some bar prep work while sitting at my desk and staring out at San Francisco Bay. And I got some paperwork for the California bar about possibly grading for the California bar. And I was like, oh, that's funny. I don't really want to grade for the California bar, but maybe I could teach people about the California bar. And then started coming up with different ways that I could do that. So thank you for sending me that mail to the California bar, because it really changed my career path. And I started tutoring locally in the Bay Area for the California bar exam. I started working at a couple of Bay Area law schools. And then, of course, Alison and I met, and the rest is history. So we got together and formed our businesses in 2011 on Twitter. And then we met in person after that, of course. And then around 2012, we launched the Law School Toolbox. And then a few months after we launched the Law School Toolbox, then we launched the Bar Exam Toolbox. And I think we've been very impressed at how our message of maybe a saner, more individualized bar prep solution has really resonated with people.
I think that's right. I mean, I was definitely a non-traditional bar studier. But I mean, I really did kind of look at the test and say, okay, what do I actually need to do to pass this? And I think that answer is going to be different for every person who's listening to this.
Yeah, exactly. So you might be wondering, what is the Bar Exam Toolbox if you have never interacted with us before? So we have a blog full of useful tips on how to study for and pass the bar exam in a bunch of different jurisdictions. We offer writing courses that are on demand to help you prepare for the California and UBE bar exams. We have self-study courses to help you prepare for the California and UBE bar exams. So these help you with template study schedules and give you a lot of advice about how to study for different parts of the test. And we also have one-on-one tutoring programs to help you prepare for the California and UBE bar exams. So we have a whole host of resources, all focusing on finding the best prep solution for you. And that could be supplementing one of the larger commercial courses or abandoning that entirely, kind of like Alison did, and doing it your own way.
Well, to be fair, I did buy a course in Massachusetts, even though the firm I actually didn't have an offer because I couldn't decide where to go. So at that point, I knew a firm would eventually reimburse me for whatever I bought, but I just couldn't stomach buying, one of the big names. So I actually did buy a prep course that was Massachusetts specific. And one of the things I really liked about it was it had basically an early version of computerized MBE prep, which I thought was amazing. I mean, now we talk a lot about Adaptivar and why we like Adaptivar. But I realized for me, something like that was going to make me improve a lot faster than just taking a bunch of random questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were able to evaluate your options and decide, what was probably going to work best for you. And oftentimes it's just not a one-stop shop answer. You kind of have to compile the resources that make sense for you and how you learn to get where you need to be. So Alison, when this was a new baby business and we were talking about what we wanted to do with our time, what were some of the reasons why we felt it was important to kind of enter this space and not just stay in the law school space?
Well, I think one of our key focuses really was to be kind of a counter-programming business to this culture of fear that's around the bar exam. I mean, let's be honest, the bar exam is a hard test. However, it's probably not the hardest thing people have ever done in their lives. They've already gotten through 3 years of law school, probably faced other challenges. And I think there's just this idea that it's such an amazing challenge that no one's ever going to get through unless they do all this stuff and study 12 hours a day for 3 months. And that's just not true.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm definitely evidence that is not true. You do not necessarily need to do that. And it's probably not even, in a lot of cases, the best use of your time. So, I think just trying to make this a more, I don't want to say relaxed experience, but a more sane experience, and one where you really do kind of rationally evaluate the options, figure out what's going to work for you, come up with a plan you're confident in, and then execute on that. And it probably doesn't mean studying 7 days a week, 20 hours a day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just being more practical, evaluating who you are as an exam taker, what are your own strengths and weaknesses, and then what do you need to do to be successful based on those. And I think that...
being strategic about it, really.
Exactly. And I think one of the dangers in this bar exam prep realm is that it's commonly discussed, although I think it's moving away from this, that there's just one way to prep. There's
just pay your money and you'll be fine.
Exactly. And I had so many people to give me that advice. Well, just do what the company tells you to, and then you're good. And I can tell you, I talk to a lot of people who fail.
And almost all of those people took a major bar prep course.
Right. And
that's the reality. It's not like they showed up on, didn't study.
Exactly. Oftentimes they worked very hard, and oftentimes they're very frustrated because they felt like they put in this enormous amount of time studying, but they didn't get the output that they were looking for. And so one of the other reasons that we wanted to enter the space was just to talk about that there are more ways to study for the bar exam than you might notice when you walk through the tables at your law school, because you're going to see the same companies showing up at your law school over and over again, and that people need to prepare in the way that works for them. And that's a very important distinction, whether you're a first-time taker or a repeat taker. You have to take into consideration financial concerns. You have to take into consideration your learning style, how you've studied in the past, what have been your academic challenges, what are your academic strengths, and really evaluate your options. Just signing a check doesn't mean that you're going to pass.
No, I think particularly someone who hasn't passed, you have even more information to work with because you have your results.
Yeah.
You can be very serious about that. Where are your weak areas? Where are your strong areas? Are there certain types of essays you're stronger on? Are there certain areas you're weaker in? Are you better at the MBE? Are you flailing on the MPT? This is all really useful information that you can then target your studying so that you're not just doing the same thing again, which is frankly probably going to result in the same undesired result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is so frustrating for folks because they'll say, well, I just retook the course that I took the first time because they gave it to me for free.
Well, it's but it didn't work the first time, so why would you do that?
Yeah, it's okay, but what different are you doing this time? Did you not do the course last time? Or did you not do the practice assignments? I mean, if you worked the course and the course didn't work, I don't think something magical is going to happen to change this outcome this next time around.
No, and I think it's hard to admit, okay, I spent all this money on this and it wasn't effective for me, but, the end goal, look, all that time and money is a sunk cost. Now you just have to figure out how to get to the point you need to be at to pass this test. And really that's all it's about. Getting to a certain number on a test. That's it. Yeah, exactly. Your goal is to not get an A+ on the bar. Your goal is minimum competency. And, it's getting over a threshold. And I think that's another thing that people oftentimes forget to keep in mind is that you cannot approach this test like you would approach every single final exam in law school where you were looking for a mastery of the subject. There's no way to have a mastery of everything that's covered on the bar exam. There's a bit of a gamble. Stuff's going to be on there you don't know. Unless you have a photographic memory, it's probably impossible to memorize all the material that could possibly be covered. You just have to know enough about what's heavily tested to be able to get a passing score. Yeah, and I mean, you laugh at me because in California, for example, I literally didn't know that professional responsibility was on the bar because I thought, we've already done the MPRE. Why would we be bothered with this? Of course, if you're listening to this, it is probably the single most heavily tested topic. I think it showed up twice on my exam. You need to study professional responsibility. However, even if you don't, it's possible you could still pass. Yes, but my caveat to that is you are an excellent exam taker. Sure, and that's basically what I was gambling on. And I'm sure that I blew the professional responsibility essay completely, but I knew that I was going to get a really strong score on the MBE, and so that's really where I focused a lot of my time and energy because I felt like I could improve faster there. Mm-hmm. And if I did well enough, I would give myself enough of a buffer that I could bomb an essay or two. And I have absolutely no doubt that if you'd only graded my essays, there's a high likelihood I would have failed. Yeah. But again, I just had to get to that number and I was looking, what is the fastest way I can get there? Yeah. So what do you think are some of the most important lessons we've learned after working with bar students now for a number of years for a lot of different exams? Well, I think it's mostly what you've touched on already. There's not one right way that you can prep for the bar that's going to guarantee you pass. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just the reality. You have to be strategic about it. You have to think about what's worked for you. You have to look at your own strengths and weaknesses. You have to figure out essentially what is my best path to passing this test and then prepare around that. Yeah, I agree. I also think a lot of people tend to ignore their own academic history in law school because it can foreshadow bar problems or bar solutions in the future, but you got to be proactive and develop a plan. So for instance, you were coming to this test as an excellent exam taker.
So
that's pretty much how I've gotten through life.
That's
actually.
How you've gotten through
life.
Let's
face it. Standardized testing, if we didn't have that, I probably would not have gotten very far.
Right. So, we're going to make allowances for how you prep for the bar compared to somebody who has consistently struggled on standardized tests, who has always
totally
had to study
different
for multiple choice.
Totally different.
Right. Who struggled on essay exams in law school, who struggled their first year and never really kind of was able to come back and regroup around those core 1L subjects. If you have had academic struggles in law school, you definitely want to start thinking about how to prepare for the exam in a way that will remedy those situations. And I think what's interesting is that some law schools, I know my law school did this back in the day, they would show bar pass rate based on your class ranking, which was really interesting. So if you were in the top 10%, you had a 99% chance of passing. There was always that fluke person on the law review that that didn't pass.
It happens. It happens every year.
It happens every year. But basically, I mean, they're saying you have good academic skills, you've done well in law school, you have a high likelihood of passing. And as you went down in the class rankings, the numbers went down on your ability to pass this test. And I think that kind of a dialogue is something that's under discussed. I think it's not necessarily just your school's pass rate, but it's what about your performance in your school could be an indicator of how you're going to do on this test. And it's not to say that you cannot pass it, because we have plenty of folks who have had academic struggles who've been able to pass the test, but you might need to get a little creative to create a plan program for you that's going to fix some of those problems that have been plaguing you in law school.
I think that's so important. If you're listening to this and you are, maybe didn't do as well in law school as you would have liked, and you were at the bottom of your class and you're thinking, oh my gosh, they're telling me I'm not going to pass. That's not what we're telling you. And I don't think there needs to be this fear around it. I think, again, you just have to be realistic. For example, you might need extra time. You might need to start studying earlier if you have trouble, remembering all the information or whatever. You might need more practice. You might need more feedback. It's absolutely possible for you to pass, but it's probably not going to be just with a cookie cutter program that you do and you show up and you're like, okay, that went great. It's just not the way that really works.
Yeah. I also think another mistake folks make is that they oftentimes don't really match their bar study to their different learning styles. So they are studying in the most effective way for them. You got to get creative with this stuff. If you're truly an auditory learner and you need to memorize based on listening to something, we've had students who, no joke, record themselves reading their outlines and then play that audio for themselves so they can memorize that way. Or they lecture to their stuffed animals or their dog, or they create mind maps because that's a way that they retain information. Or, some people flashcards work for them. But whatever you need to do to engage with this material, it's very person specific. And oftentimes these large prep companies who are offering one solution for everybody aren't going to tailor their solutions to your learning style. So it's in the end, it's your responsibility to say, this is how I learn and this is how I'm going to tailor my study and create different solutions so I can retain this information in the best way that I can.
I think that's absolutely right. For me, I'm not really an auditory learner. So the idea of sitting there for 4 hours plus per day, listening to someone lecture on a topic just was not going to be efficient for me. I'm sure I probably maybe could have learned the material, but for me, I learned a lot better by sitting in a room, reading something and putting the material together. So that was how I went about doing it.
Right. The other thing that I think is under discussed in the bar arena is how to handle stress and anxiety and then get accommodations if it becomes really debilitating. Everybody talks about stress around the bar exam. That's something that's commonly discussed, but the solutions for stress and anxiety are not discussed in a way that I think is productive in a lot of bar preparation programs. And folks tend to discount the negative impact that stress and anxiety can have on your ability to prepare and your ability to execute in the exam room. So if it really becomes severe, that's where accommodations come into play, because you need to apply to accommodations to change the way that you take this test to allow you to compete on a level playing field. But if you're just someone who is having trouble, remaining focused, or your mind is going blank because your fight or flight response has been kicked in because of stress, or whatever it may be. There are things that you can do to help manage this throughout the entirety of the bar process. And so one of the things that we think we talk about a lot on our blog, and we talk a lot about with our own private tutoring students, is how to manage this process so you don't send yourself into a stress-induced crazy state, and finding your own coping mechanisms for that, whether it be doing yoga or having an exercise regimen or doing mindfulness training, so you can do meditations, whether it's breathing exercises. There are tons and tons of options that you can do to help yourself cope, but I think it's under discussed in the bar prep community, and it can cause you to fail the bar, which is heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was studying in California, I remember I got a monthly all-you-can-go yoga pass, and I was literally going twice a day. And finally, after a week or so of showing up twice a day, every day, they finally, the owner was like, "What are you doing? Why are you here so much?" And then I was like, "Oh, I'm studying for the bar exam," and I get really stressed out. She was like, "Oh, maybe you should come a third time." But I do feel like it really helped, and that was an economical way that I could do the self-care that I needed to do in order to be able to get the studying done that I needed to do without completely flipping out.
Yeah. I think these stress and anxiety issues are even a bigger deal if you're coming back from a bar exam failure. We talk about bar exam failure a lot on the blog. We'll talk about it a lot on this podcast, because I really hold a special place in my heart for people who are coming back to this exam after a failure. And it can be so hard because people fail for a variety of reasons. It does not mean that you will not be a quality lawyer, that your legal career is completely stunted, and everyone's going to know that you have this black mark on your career for the rest of your life. Most people will never know or care that you failed the exam back in the early days of your career. But coming back from failure is hard. You have emotional impacts of that. You have the academic impacts of that. You have to invest more money, more time to studying. You can't work as a lawyer until you get this bar card. And so, really giving yourself space to move through all the things that come up with a bar exam failure, and also creating a plan so you can remedy the problems that you had, is so critical. But I think it's a special experience that has to be dealt with in a very thoughtful way. You just can't, like we said earlier, you can't just say, "Oh, I'll just do the same thing again and hope for a different outcome."
Yeah, that's unlikely to work. And I think you do kind of have to sit with the disappointment before you can really move on.
Yeah. And the other thing that we're seeing more and more with students who are working with us in a variety of capacities is that people are working and studying. And this is really tricky. And I think with the economy the way it is, people are working non-lawyer jobs, or they're working jobs where they need a law license, but they're allowed to continue working while they're studying. And I think people underestimate how hard it is to balance working and studying, because your best brain is oftentimes used at work, and most of the people who are working and studying are actually coming back after a failure. So you've also got kind of some baggage around that, but you really need to be smart and have a plan of how you're going to balance your time. And this is often why people will hire a tutor to try and come up with a study plan and help you be very smart about how you're going to study so you can move through the process and be held accountable.
I think it is really hard. I mean, I remember when I was going to be taking the bar and I was working, I had the best of intentions. I was going to start 2 months early and do some work on the weekends or do some work at night. And I mean, that just wasn't feasible. I was working 10 to 12 hour days. I was working a lot of weekends. Despite my best intentions, I just literally couldn't start studying until I had the time off, and then time was really short. So, yeah. It's a stressful situation all around for sure.
It is. And that is, outside the fact of sometimes folks have a job and they're studying for the bar, and they have a significant other and or kids and or dogs and or ill parents, and are trying to balance a lot of life responsibilities with studying for the bar. It becomes very tricky. And it's very easy to fall into these traps where you're studying at 6 a.m. on 4 hours of sleep because that's when you've decided to do that. Well, that's not really sustainable for months and months and months.
Definitely not.
Then you're going to like move into the I'm losing my mind, I have no REM sleep situation, which is not going to help you prepare for the test. So
not good for your memory.
Not good for your memory. So I think that it is important to, be very thoughtful and plan ahead and start studying early and maybe have somebody, hold you accountable and help you pivot and update study schedules and things like that if, life happens and work gets crazy and you're not able to study as you had hoped.
Right. And just to be realistic too, is this really the time that you have to take the bar exam? And if that's the case, how do you make that a priority? And if you don't absolutely have to take it right then, are there things you could do maybe to do now to make it easier in 6 months, whether it's saving money and taking more time off or whatever, but you really just have to be realistic about what you're getting into.
Yep. So those are some of the, important lessons we've learned, and we're going to dive into these and a lot more of these types of topics in the podcast. So let's take a few seconds to talk about how this podcast is going to work. So our goals are to share information we think can be helpful for you as you prepare for the bar exam, whether you're a first-time taker or a repeat taker. We will talk about how to study and how to approach each portion of the test, so you can expect episodes specifically on the multiple choice portion, on the essays, and on the performance test. And we're going to talk with experts in the field about the best way to prepare and problem solve if you're struggling with these different parts of the test. As you can tell, we love talking about stress and anxiety. Is that a lawyer thing? I don't know. But we're going to talk a lot about handling stress and anxiety and even how to get accommodations if you need them. We're going to profile helpful bar tools that we like that you may not have heard of or that you may think are not necessary to supplement your bar prep. But we think that for a good number of students, they can be very helpful for you as you study. So again, we want to just open this dialogue on what are the options available, and then you can evaluate what sounds like a good solution for you based on your individual situation. And our goal is to release new episodes throughout the year, but we hope that these episodes remain evergreen, and so you should be able to go back and reference episodes because they're not going to go out of date. So I think that's the podcast plan. Do you think I missed anything, Alison?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it. I mean, our goal is basically to provide useful information, whether you're taking the bar, you're working with people who take the bar. I don't know, you're just a masochist and like to listen to podcasts about the bar exam after you pass. I don't know,
Hey, no judgment. I mean, we help people with the bar exam and talk about it all the time. So
yeah. So, and we'll try not to make it too boring.
Yeah. So we hope that this is going to help you stay grounded and studying smart. And our goal is to just help you, get through this experience so you can hopefully make this time your last. And with that, I think we're going to finish up this intro episode because we're out of time. So I want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. That's also where you can find information on our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exams. If you'd enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything in the future. If you're still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or Alison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.